Present now. Okay, so let me know when you guys can see our screen. Okay. So what we have here is a view within ClearWork, which is our BPM solution. So as Shomi mentioned, kind of behind the scenes, this is sitting on top of many different automations. So we have our own RPA engine that has several thousand pre-delivered bots for really common enterprise software packages. But we can also consume bots from Automation Anywhere, UiPath, Blue Prism. It doesn't really matter who the vendor is, as long as we're in the mix. We can connect all of those bots into a logical business process. So what we're looking at here is we have a vendor invoices page. So I was thinking this is probably the closest to a production accounting scenario here, and we've limited the amount of fields that a user would have to enter on essentially a vendor invoice. So they would come in here and click create, and by default some values are pre-populated. The reason why we do that is usually we find 90% of the time the currency doesn't change, but obviously there are scenarios where you want to change the currency to something else, so you could do that. And I'm trying to find where's GBP, British pounds, whatever you would need to change it to. But the idea here is that the user has a very minimal amount of fields that they need to key in, and we'll talk through some of the automations that are happening behind the scenes. So firstly, they need to select a vendor that they're buying from. They could search within your system for those vendors, or the most recent vendors that they've used appear in essentially their browser's cache. So Jane's Hair Care, if we're going to pretend that Jane's Hair Care is a vendor on a TV show set or something that they use pretty frequently, I select that vendor. The purchase date, we can label this whatever you want to label it. The idea is we don't want to confuse the user. So typically field labels match what they mean from a business perspective. So what date did you purchase these services from this vendor? Behind the scenes, that's actually being mapped to the GL posting date for this vendor invoice. So that's one thing to note, is that just because it says one thing on the web page doesn't mean we can't map it to something within your system. But we want it make sense for them. So what day did I buy this? But they don't even need to know that behind the scenes that's going to the GL accounting posting date. Then I can select a due date. It's not a required field, or they could select payment terms. So I'm going to do net 30, payment method, check. And these would just come from your system. So whatever your payment methods are that you have configured in your system, they appear as drop-downs. And then again, similar to the vendors, the different expense types that they use frequently would appear in their drop-down list, or they could search. I'm just going to select Procure to Pay Demo. And then I'm going to type in here what the item's actually for. So since it's a haircutting. And apparently he needs a lot of them. Then maybe we can do Tilda Swinton haircuts. She only needed 2, but hers are much more expensive, so they're $1,000 each. So really that's it. I mean, that's the minimum amount of fields they would need to key in. They could also make notes in here to say, like, please don't use the hairdresser anymore. She's always late. So the real magic now happens when I click save, and we'll talk through kind of what's happening here. So typically, your accounting best practice would be, if you're going to create a vendor invoice, you need to have a purchase order first to match that invoice against. I think in a lot of scenarios we see out in the field, the purchase order doesn't exist, and whether or not you would want them to actually create that, somebody's going to have to create something to follow your normalized process. So our RPA engine behind the scenes is looking at this and saying, okay, let me go create a purchase order for these items, and then create a vendor invoice that matches those purchase order items. In that case, they could, we could have a little pop-up when they click create that says, please enter your purchase order, and it would create the vendor invoice with reference to that purchase order. Yeah, we could do that too. Once they've selected the vendor and they select the expense type, it could basically pop that up already, and pre-fill. Yeah, so that's kind of where our bot builder comes in. So we have two different builders. The Clear Work Builder is where you build the pages. So the buttons, how the buttons get connected to bots, that's all done in the Clear Work Builder. In the Clear Process Builder, that's where we're actually building our bots. So if we go ahead and take a look at, the example we just showed you, which was, what were we doing? Vendor invoice. Um, you know what? In so this is, I wouldn't say complex, actually pretty normal process here, but we're executing a number of steps in your ERP system to, one, create the purchase order, release it automatically so that we can create the vendor invoice. But you can put cool logic in here that allows you to add your own business rules this is basically an open source scripting language. So before it hits Workday, for example, we can say, hey, we want the due date of our invoices and purchase orders to always be 30 days from today's date. So, I calculate that there, and then I'm able to pass it in. You can also default fields. So, fields that have no relevance to the user or fields that never change, we can default them as well behind the scenes so that the user never sees them. And because of all this, we're able to expose a very clean UI that is really only asking them to enter the minimum amount of data they need to enter to get this processed. Yeah, so if you want to see, to show you what that looks like, say, your users came back and said, we want payment terms and payment method to be flipped. We don't want us, we don't like that sequence. Um, Whoever your SME is, whether it's one of us or somebody internally, they would come into the Clear Work Builder. They would to scroll down to those fields. So we scroll down, then we see there's payment method and payment terms. I can simply drag and drop and save. And when I refresh this page, payment terms and payment method will be flipped. So that's an ultra simple example. But that's really how we build the pages. And really, we pre-build all of these pages. So you get a template that works for most organizations. So we do everything: vendors, requisitions, purchase orders, vendor invoices. We even do the sales side too. So um, things like processing customer invoices, applying cash against invoices, everything related to what an organization does as part of their business. So this is all pre-delivered and it's platform agnostic, so it doesn't matter what the underlying system is. We'll find a way to get that data into those systems. So we prefer SAML. So I assume you're either using Okta or Active Directory. Those are kind of the two big ones. Um, and users are authenticated using the standard the standard SAML login page that they would have with Okta or Active Directory. And once they're signed in, they're brought into this screen. We can also do system-based logins. So if you wanted to authenticate against SAP or Workday or whatever, we can do that as well. Yep. Well, so let me separate. Let me make it more clear. So the authentication versus security, or the privileges that a user has, are for us are two separate things. So when I log into the application, I can log in, with a username and a password or via SSO. Once I'm once I'm logged in, we're querying from the underlying system real time what the privileges are. So when I logged in, it pulled back my authorizations from that underlying system. So then I am not allowed to do things in here that I'm not allowed to do in those underlying systems. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. The latter. Yeah, the latter. So think of this as basically a real-time orchestration layer. So the data ultimately resides in your accounting system. Yes. Yep. Typically, what we've seen is because we're interacting either at an API level or even at a stored procedure level, so we can even go a level deeper directly to the database and trigger stored procedures and functions, but that it's faster than using the native application itself. Um, But yeah, 10 to 15 seconds seems like a long time for a list of vendors to come back. Is it querying all the vendors, or are they required to enter some search criteria before that runs? Well, and one of the things I mentioned too about the frequently used values stay in the user's browser's cache. So if they're typically only dealing with 7 vendors on the set of a show, those 7 vendors are going to appear here in a drop down, so they don't actually have to run the search. Um, as many as you want. We set this default at 10. So if I kind of show you an example of one that has more, um, actually it was in the vendor invoices page. Um, the expense type here has the last, I've looked at 7 recently, different expense types. Um, so that is configurable as well. And then what's also kind of cool is that we can require that these searches are completely configurable. You can search based on really anything, any piece of data within Workday, but we can require that they enter a certain number of fields or a certain number of characters before they can even execute the search, just to make it a little faster. So there's no reason why a user should be returning 40,000 rows of data. Um, they can be, but typically we find, because of the performance issues that you mentioned, we really just want to make one call. So once they've entered their criteria, um, you know, we want to make one call to search for all the vendor invoices for that vendor, or whatever you might be searching for. Yep. Um, in here, so in the RPA layers, which is called Clear Process, this is just Django. It's a JSON-based open source scripting language. And the beauty of that is, regardless of the system you're interacting with, you could be interacting with Salesforce, whatever. The scripting is still the same. Um, so we've done all the heavy lifting to basically commonize all of the different integrations that you could possibly have, so that you have one place to create these pretty rich automations. And then in terms of being able to configure the user interface, we have 22-year-olds right out of college that can figure out how to drag and drop these things without you don't need to know HTML, you don't need to know JavaScript. This is just an open source framework that Facebook built called React. So you can drag elements, you can create new elements, and then refresh the page, and they're there. Yeah, absolutely. So from that list, I'm going to show you the image on our site that's a little easier to read. Um, There we go. So we integrate with pretty much anything built after the start of this century is either SOAP or REST enabled. Anything built prior to the year 2000, like SAP and Oracle eBiz. We have our own native connectors that allow us to REST enable everything within those systems. But we can really connect to anything. So this really specific CXML protocol allows us to do punch-out integration with any of your large vendors. So Amazon, Staples, the guys you see there, but any of your large vendors that have online shopping capabilities, we can punch out from there. I can actually show you what that looks like. So let's go to requisitions. So I go shop online. In terms of procure-to-pay automation, what's kind of cool about this is it eliminates the need for a user to actually have to key in a purchase order in your system of record in Workday. So I can order a printer. Let's see. Did not show me printers. Come on, Amazon. There we go. So if I add this to my cart, maybe add a few more things, add that to my cart, and sure, some toner so I can get ripped off by these guys. So kind of the biggest number one issue in procure to pay is, I call it human laziness. Some people like to say, well, no, they just forgot to go into Workday and create a requisition or a purchase order. But most of the time it's laziness. And because we integrate directly with these e-commerce sites, when I submit this order, it's taking those 3 line items in my shopping cart and feeding it into Workday at line item level detail so that they don't have to do it. They can't possibly mess up the process. If they need those supplies ordered, when they click order, it's going to be fed into Workday automatically with line item level detail so that your invoice from Amazon is always going to match your purchase order 100% of the time. So you eliminate a lot of that AP reconciliation that's time consuming and expensive. But 2, at the end of a quarter, at the end of the year, when you've negotiated prices with Amazon to say that hey, you're going to give me this price on this printer based on us buying 2,000 of these over the next year. Well, if you look back and say, well, we actually bought 3,000 of these from you because we have this data at a line item level within Workday, we can say, you know what, you need to give us a better rate because we ordered way more than 2,000 of those printers last year. So it gives you a lot of negotiating leverage all through automation. So it's pretty slick. It's like you're on our sales team. I could show you that's one of the number one things that our customers request is the ability to play well with Excel. So, assuming this scenario is not terribly relevant to Netflix because you don't have customers ordering things from you, but what I want to show you is the Excel integration. So I'm here in a customer order, and from here I can upload a file as long as it's in the right format. So let's go to demo data, sales orders page, and I think there's maybe 10 records in this Excel file, but the idea is it could be 100 records, it could be 1,000 records. It's all loaded right into that table so that I can click save and I don't have to manually type all of those line items. So you can do that with journal entries. You can do it with really anything. We play well with Excel because that's how most businesses do business. Yeah. So to show you, what an error message might look like, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to bring up a customer here. and try to change their address to a country code that doesn't exist. And there we go, our Wi-Fi is getting a little shaky. So let's do a state code of XX because we know that doesn't exist. There's two levels of validation. One is in the scripting that we have before we hit your system of record, we can implement edit checks, but ultimately your system of record is also going to pass back error messages. So this is coming back from an SAP system, and SAP saying region XX is not defined for country US. So that's how we would display the errors to the users. And they could click X and say, okay, well, I need to change this to, a valid value for, for that customer. And what's cool is this kind of becomes your single pane of glass for your entire business. So the reason why Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism and UiPath partner with us is because we give them a single pane of glass for all of their automations. So as an example, this button here to validate the email address for this customer, that's calling an Automation Anywhere bot. But this button right here that wants to pull up the customer's address on Google Maps, that's calling one of our bots. And then that makes that REST call to Google to display that map. There we go. There's the map. So it really, regardless of what's underlying this process, we can expose it to the users. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, because basically every one of these automations that we have here is one of our bots. But we can also consume, like there's Automation Anywhere email address validator. That's calling a bot in our control room within Automation Anywhere. But since we take a system and platform agnostic approach with our user interface or our BPM solution, if you pick, say your proof of concept with Automation Anywhere doesn't go so well, and instead you go with UiPath, it doesn't matter to us. We're just, you give me an IP address of a control room for one of those 3 RPA vendors, and I can have this button pointed to UiPath's version of that instead of Automation Anywhere. So it really, reduces the risk on your side of getting locked in with a specific RPA vendor. For a lot of reasons. You may discover that a year from now their customer service all of a sudden is not that great, or the performance of the new version of the platform is very slow. This gives you the opportunity to decouple yourselves from that vendor and maybe move to another one. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why they've partnered with us, is that the biggest issue the RPA vendors are having right now is that they really haven't progressed beyond back office finance. And if you want to attack, okay, okay, I think it's Tom's. I'm gonna mute Tom for a second. Okay. Is that they can automate a handful of tasks in back office finance, but if you really want to move the productivity needle at an organization, you have to attack larger business processes like procure to pay and order to cash and month end close. And in order to do that, you need to get these bots in the hands of thousands of users. And that's where they're looking to us to say, okay, if we go and create 75 bots in Procure to Pay, I need a solution, a BPM solution that's going to allow me to invoke those bots as a user in my Procure to Pay functions. So, like I said, every one of these buttons is invoking a bot, whether it's one of ours or Automation Anywhere's, it doesn't matter. But the idea is we're able to string together a logical business process that allows you to really scale the size and breadth of your RPA implementation. Yep. Yeah. Until they build a BPM solution, which all three of them has said they're not going to do anytime soon. You need something to put on top of these automations. And what a lot of customers have done is just they've had to build their own. They've had to build a Java or a .NET or an HTML5 application on top of these automations. And unfortunately, it's kind of crazy when you think about it because you buy software to put on top of other software and then you build your own custom code on top of that. It's almost like a sanity check. Um, if we had to rank by just number of installs, it would be UiPath first, then Automation Anywhere, then Blue Prism, um, and that's actually kind of matches up with their market share. So UiPath is kind of the big man on campus, um, and Automation Anywhere is the I don't know what you would call them the yeah yeah. Yeah, so it's pulling the data and then representing it in a way that's, again, configurable. So, we have the same data set here represented four different ways. So the most popular is the grid. Everyone loves the grid, so they can download it to Excel and do all kinds of fun stuff. But we also have all kinds of other different charts. So lines, bars, pie charts. Um, but the underlying data itself is coming from Workday or from several systems. In this case, yep, yeah, and we have Salesforce and SAP here side by side. That gives you one composite view of what's going on with your business. So you can build something similar on the procurement side. We have a dashboard that looks kind of like this that shows you your days payables outstanding over the last 12 months. And that's just a pretty simple calculation, but it's just pulling data from Workday to determine what your actual DPO is. Yeah, so really, typically what you're doing here on the vendor invoice side is you've got a payable sitting out in Workday. Once this vendor invoice is created, that payable can go out obviously a number of different ways. But do you guys solely do EFT or do you actually have paper checks that get written to vendors? Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, that's just kind of the way most businesses in the U.S. are for whatever reason. I've been trying to get companies off paper checks for years, and I'm not winning. Um, So, that being said, you have a payable associated with this vendor invoice. It could be something as simple as a button that says, add check number. So if they actually cut the check, the physical check to the vendor, they can come in here and click a button that makes a note within Workday that that specific pre-numbered check has been used for this vendor invoice and this payable. Yeah, so pretty much everything in here can be done one by one or in mass. So I'm going to come up with an example here of open purchase orders that need to be approved. I only have one, but pretend first of all that these are open payables to a vendor, and that there are 25 of them. I can select all and release them to be paid with the click of a button. Yep. Yeah, I mean it's a few weeks worth of just iterating over the pages with your subject matter experts, and then they're done. Really, I mean we've had customers go live in less than a month, but our average is probably 45 to 60 days to go live. Typically because we find that the business process isn't that well defined a lot of times, so we have to come in and do a little bit of business process reengineering before we're able to put this automation on top of it. Oh no, no. So the Workday is just a standard SOAP service. So all the Workday services we can already call them. So yeah, so we have an XML connector that allows us to consume really any SOAP service. Yep. Yeah, and that varies from environment to environment. So this is one of our dev environments, and but yeah, you would see your list of you would see Workday here side by side with Automation Anywhere and whatever other systems you want to bring into this single pane of glass. We've made it very simple in the recent years because people don't like user-based subscriptions and they don't like bot-based subscriptions. They just want an all-you-can-eat buffet. So we just price this by module. If you're going to use sales, you can put 10 users on or 100,000. Doesn't matter to us. Um, purchasing, finance, and production, are all licensed separately as well. But production is really more manufacturing, so probably wouldn't be relevant for you guys. So you'd really kind of be looking at finance and purchasing. So if you were to purchase the purchasing module, you would get all of these pages, and you could put as many users as you want on the platform. Um, like I said, it could be 10, it could be. Yep. But yeah, there's no restrictions on how many bots you can use per month or any of that kind of stuff. We just found that metering in general is just people don't like it. So yep. Yep. AWS. So we create each one of these, what we call subdomains up here in the address bar, is a dedicated private instance for you. So we would typically set up like a dev, QA, and a production instance, and then they would be pointed to your respective dev, QA, and prod instances of your backend systems. Um, and it's pretty lightweight. I'm assuming you guys are running everything in Amazon because your core platform is running in Amazon. So setting up the networking for that is pretty straightforward. Yeah, so it's basically what they would call a VPC to VPC connection. Yeah, yeah. As long as they have internet and they can get to a browser, um, and typically in these locations, are they connected to your network, or do they have to connect to a VPN, or how do they? Yep. Yep. Yeah, about as simple as it gets. The fewer the fields, so sure. Yeah, I will send it to you. All right. Well, thank.
That'd be great.
All right.